Hi everyone, it's Kathy for Not Too Shabby, and today I'll be sharing how to create a one layer-ish invitation, and I'll be using the Picnic Fun stamp set and the Slimline Windows die. The stamp set is from Not Too Shabby and the Slimline die is from Whimsy Stamps. Both products are available over in the Not Too Shabby shop. I started out by inking up the stamps with Catherine Pooler Midnight ink. I stamped that onto Cougar Super Smooth cardstock because I'll be doing some Copic coloring, and that is my personal favorite cardstock when I use my Copics. To color in the Panda, I started out with BV25 and added that in the areas where I thought it would be the darkest. Although BV25 is not my darkest color, I decided to start with it because I can get a little heavy-handed at times. So after I added in the shadows where I thought it would be the darkest, I came in with BV23 and pretty much filled in the rest of the black areas on the Panda for his ears and the patches over his eyes, as well as his body. I did concentrate the BV25 a little heavier down on his body, well, her body, because she's wearing a little sundress, closest to the picnic basket. And once I had all of that blended in, I came in with C7, which is my darkest color, and I added that very sparingly. Once I was done with that, I blended it out again with the BV25, and then I went over it one more time with the BV23. For her little nose, I used C7 and BV25, which I didn't really need to use two colors there because her nose is pretty tiny. Then I filled in the inside of her ears with R20. Once I was done with that, I decided to add the shadows into the white part of her face. For that, I used C3 and C1, and I started out with the C3, and really I just kind of traced around the outer edge of her face, and then I blended that out with the C1, and then I came in with my colorless blender to blend it out so that it wouldn't have such harsh edges. Next, I moved on to coloring in her little sundress, and you'll see that with the color palette that I chose, the green, the yellow, and the blue, I thought I wanted to stay a little bit lighter, and later on down the road, I end up bringing in darker and darker colors because I was not getting the contrast that I had hoped for. Anyway, for her little jumper, I started out with G02, and then I blended that out with G12. Once I was done with that, I moved on to coloring in the picnic basket. And for the picnic basket, I wanted to have a center highlight in the front of the picnic basket. So I started on the outer edges with YR27. I blended that towards the center with YR23, and I left quite a bit of white space for that center highlight and finished it off with YR21. I'll make sure to have everything that I used listed in the description box below, and I'll also have all of the Copic markers that I used. These images are really easy to color. They're a really good size. They're not too small, they're not too big, so the coloring goes pretty quickly. For the banner, I did the same colors for the two pennants on either side. I just did those in yellows. Then I did one green and one blue, and then I moved on to the picnic table. And it was with the umbrella of the picnic table, that's where I kind of realized that I wasn't getting the contrast, particularly with the blues. I keep trying to get the contrast with the blue, but eventually I realized that I'm going to have to go in with a much darker blue to get that contrast. And you'll see how much I struggle when I'm coloring in this umbrella. It's like I suddenly forgot how to color something that's in that half-rounded type of shape. Anyway, I started out with BG02, and for whatever reason, I just kind of started outlining that one panel of the umbrella. And the next color I came in with was B01, and just extended out that outline and tried to keep a center highlight in that section of the umbrella, and it just looked weird to me. It wasn't turning out the way I wanted it to at all, and what I should have done was I should have flicked with my darkest color from the top and the bottom, which is what I did when I brought in the B04. so that it would be much darker at the top and much darker at the bottom and not just outlined around that panel. So after I brought in the B04, I went through my colors again to blend them out, and I'm still not happy with it. But at that point, I'm like, I got to move on to my yellow. And for the yellow, I started with a darker yellow, and I did flick from the top down and from the bottom up, leaving a highlight in the center so that it would have that more round appearance. And I was pretty okay with the yellow panel of the umbrella, and then I moved on to the green, and I made the mistake of trying to just use the two colors, G02 and G12, even though I did flick from the top down and from the bottom up, and I left that white space. To get the G02 and the G12 to get kind of like an in-between color, I did the tip to tip. And I finished up the green and I didn't like it. So then I brought in the G05 and added that in again, flicking from the top down and from the bottom up, and I was much happier with that. Then I went back to the blue panel because the other two had a lot more contrast, so I ended up coming in with B06, blending that out with B04, and finishing up with the BG02. So after all of that, I was finally happy with the umbrella, and then I looked at my banner and wasn't happy with the contrast because the colors were too light and there literally was no contrast. So what I did for the banner was I brought in the darkest markers that I had used for the umbrella and then blended that out with the excuse me, and then blended that out with the lighter colors. Then I decided that the jumper didn't have enough contrast, so I brought the G05 in and added some darker areas, especially on the side where she's behind the picnic basket, and blended that out with the G02 and the G12. Then it was time to move on to the tablecloth. For the tablecloth, I started with B00 and I just colored in the blue squares, and I colored them in completely, and that was just so I could map out the checkered pattern on the tablecloth. After I had all the blue squares picked out, I came in with the B06 and literally just outlined the square. Then I came in with the B04 and extended the B06 out, but I still left a little bit of highlight in the center. And then I blended that out with the B00. Then I moved on to coloring in the pole for the umbrella, and I started with C3 and just did a little bit at the bottom of the knob at the top of the umbrella. Then I flicked down from right underneath the umbrella and right up from the tabletop, and then I blended that out with the C1. Then I moved on to the white squares on the tablecloth. I did the same thing. I just kind of traced around the outer edge with C1, and then I blended it out with my colorless blender, just again to soften those harsher edges. For the picnic table, I did something that I don't normally do, and I colored the whole thing in with my lightest color, which is E31, and I did that just so I would have a better visual for myself to see where I was going to have to add in the darker areas. After I had it all colored in, I came in with my darkest color, which is E37, and added that on either side of the tablecloth on the tabletop, and then added shadows underneath where the tablecloth fell on the legs, and then underneath the bench part of the table, the seats, however those are called. And then I blended that out with E35 and left a little bit of a highlight down like on the center of the legs that are facing front, and blended everything out with E34. After I was done with all of the coloring, I cut the images out with my brother's scan and cut machine. And here's where I fixed up her little eyes. I used a black glaze pen and did little dots on her eyes just to make them stand out a little bit more. And then I decided that her jumper and the banner needed to have polka dots. So I used a white gel pen to add those polka dots in. And after I was sure that the black glaze pen was dry, I used the white gel pen just to add highlights to her eyes. Then it was pretty much time to put my 1 layer-ish invitation together. I cut a piece of green cardstock down to 3.5 by 8.5, and I had run the Slimline Windows die through my Gemini Junior with a piece of 80-pound Neenah Classic Crest cardstock in white. I used liquid glue to adhere that to the front of the green card panel. Now, the reason that I did the invitation this way is I thought that it would be something that could very easily be hung up on a refrigerator, and it wouldn't have to be opened to see all of the information for the picnic. So that was my thinking behind creating this invitation. Anyway, after I had the frame adhered into place, I had cut down some patterned paper to fit into the squares and the long skinny rectangles. And Whimsy Stamps made it really easy to do that. The squares measure 1.25 by 1.25. So I cut a piece of green polka dot cardstock down to that and stamped Picnic Fun and adhered that into place. For the square above that, I cut a piece of blue polka dot paper. And then for the long skinny rectangles, they measure 1.25 by 2.75 inches, and I just cut yellow polka dot paper to fit into those. Now for the big rectangle in the center, that measures 2.75 inches by 1.75 inches. And to get all of the information like the date, the place, the time, and the RSVP, what I did was I opened a document in Pages and I dropped in a text box, and then I resized the text box so that it would fit within the 2.75 by 1.75 parameters, and then typed the information that I wanted to have on that little box, and then just printed it out and trimmed it down with my paper trimmer. I used my tape runner to adhere the little squares and rectangles into place, and then of course I had to add foam tape to my other little elements. So I had those guys popped up with foam tape and put those into place, and that's it. That finishes up my invitation. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.